Hello, everyone. Welcome to Product-Led Growth, a guide for marketing and product teams. While we're waiting for everyone to join, would love for you to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from, but I will get started pretty quickly as we've got a very packed agenda for today's event. I'll give about a minute and then I'll get us rolling. Ooh, I see someone from Nova Scotia, Canada. I am also Canadian, although not living there right now. I am based in the Netherlands. And I see there's also someone from Tilburg, which, sorry, I'm working on my Dutch. I don't think it's that great. Hello to folks from Berlin, Madrid, Paris, Milan, also another Canadian. Really great to see people joining us from all over the world. Super excited that you could all join us today. As I said, we are going to talk about product-led growth today. I'm going to repeat the title. It's a guide for marketing and product teams. My name is Laura Wong, and I am your host. I'm product manager here at Hotjar, and I am focused on new user growth and acquisition and growth channels, which means that I've had the pleasure of working with today's speakers very closely. I'll give you a quick introduction of both of them. So Andre is a director of product based in Berlin, and he leads Hotjar's Conversions Tribe. He has extensive experience in building product-led growth strategies at companies like Revolut, Remote Year, and Hotjar, but also as a startup founder. Outside of work, Andre is an outdoors enthusiast, and you'll often find him climbing, hiking, and planning potlucks with his friends. Andy is Hotjar's director of growth based in London, leading performance and content teams. Leading performance and content teams within the marketing department here at Hotjar. And before Hotjar, he led marketing and demand generation at multiple companies. Not only is he a growth expert, but also well-versed in working closely with product and sales teams, as well as many other ones. And he is also a proud dad of 3 kids and a keen runner, yoga practitioner, and trains in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu multiple times a week. So here is what we have in store today. Andre and Andy will be sharing a masterclass in product-led growth, including frameworks, best practices, and examples from their own experiences. And then afterward, they will be answering your burning questions live. So please add them to the chat throughout the presentation. I have my wonderful colleague, Nicole, here in the chat with you, and she'll be helping moderate and collect these questions so that we can answer them all at the end. But before I hand over the mic, I actually have a special announcement to make, which is that we are giving away 5 pairs of free tickets to Hot Sauce, which is our in-person conference taking place in New York City this November. This November. So all you need to do is scan the QR code, fill out the form, and then you'll be automatically entered to win one of these pairs of tickets. Now I will hand it over to Andre and Andy.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Laura, for the warm intro. And hi, everyone. I'm Andre. And let me just start recording, sharing my screen. Give me 1 second. Perfect. And start the slide deck. Perfect. So thank you again for joining us today. At Hotjar, we're huge fans of product-led growth, as Laura was saying, and Andy and I are really excited to share with you some of the lessons we learned over the course of the years through a lot of experimentation and a lot of trial and error. And there's a lot of content we included for you today, which is why we'll share this deck immediately after the webinar, so then you can refer back to any of the slides if you want to, so you don't need to take a lot of notes as we go through. So let's dive straight into the fundamentals of PLG and why we're so strong advocates for it at Hotjar. The main reason is because in the last decade, the way we adopt software has radically changed. Just a few years back, most software products were sold by sales teams directly to executives and budget owners who would sign expensive long-term contracts and then force their teams to use those products to justify these investments. And that's the reason why a lot of us here today at some point probably used software that was clunky and slow and that we absolutely hated. And that has radically changed now. Most software is free to use, very easy to get set up and get started with. And that enables end users to try it out themselves without any executive approvals. So this large shift resulted in a lot of end users today finding software products that they believe they're valuable for themselves or for their team, adopting them and making a case to their managers to pay for those. So in short, we went from a very top-down buying journey to a very bottoms-up one where many end users dictate what software their teams and their companies end up using. So that's exactly what led to the massive adoption of product-led growth among SaaS companies. And in short, for those of you that are not familiar with the term, PLG is a go-to-market strategy that implies putting your product at the very core of your growth strategy. And the way to do that is by shifting the product experience from being an afterthought, like in the traditional funnel that you see on the left of the slide, to being at the very center of the entire funnel, like you see on the right. And using that product experience to drive user acquisition, conversion, and retention. And this PLG trend definitely didn't go unnoticed. If you look at the publicly traded companies that adopted PLG over time, there were 4 times as many in 2021 as they were compared to just 4 years before that. And many very popular products that you likely used at some point, like Zoom, what we're using today for this webinar, Dropbox, Slack, or Miro, owe a lot of their meteoric growth to PLG. So the question begs, why do so many companies invest in PLG to begin with? And the answer is quite simple. PLG leaders have a growth rate that's 2.5 times higher as compared to their traditional SaaS peers. And in fact, PLG leaders outperform them on most other dimensions as well, including retention and revenue. So we looked at all the advantages of PLG, but it's also important to know that PLG is definitely not a silver bullet. And many believe that as soon as you adopt PLG, the success of your growth strategy is almost guaranteed. And that's definitely not always the case. For example, we're currently in a tech downturn now, and PLG companies definitely haven't been immune to that by any means, as most tech companies faced a slower growth rate in the last 2 years, as you can see in this graph. Despite that, though, PLG leaders, which you can see in the green at the top of the graph, are still growing twice as fast as their peers. Another important aspect to consider is that not all business models lend themselves to PLG to the same extent. For example, what you can see in the first row of this table is that it's much easier for products targeting smaller companies to successfully adopt PLG. And that's because smaller companies have a much simpler buying process with less compliance and budget approvals needed to start using that new software. And don't get me wrong, we don't want to discourage anyone from pursuing PLG. We're obviously clear fans of it, but I think it's also important to know the challenges that you might face depending on the market you're focusing on with your product and with your company. So PLG can mean a lot of different things to different people, and we want to debunk some of these myths today. And the first one is that PLG equals freemium. And as long as you offer a free version of your product, job is done, you're a PLG company. And that's really not the case. While offering your product for free can be a really strong growth lever, freemium is just one of the many PLG tactics, and there's a lot more that we're going to uncover today. For example, trials can also be a powerful alternative to freemium, actually, as a way to give your visitors a taste of your product. Both of these mechanisms serve different purposes for different audience segments. And what you can see in this table is that freemium is twice as good at converting website visitors into signups, but it's actually a lot worse at converting those signups into paying customers, where trials are much more effective at. And that's largely because freemium is there at casting a really wide net and at attracting a very broad audience, while trials is generally a better mechanism for helping convert very high intent visitors and the target audience that has a higher willingness to pay. And ultimately, which one is a better fit for you in this case between a freemium and a trial really depends on your target audience, but also on your growth goals. And at Hotjar, for example, we offer actually both because they each focus on different segments of our very broad target market that we're focusing on. And all of this leads us to a really important aspect, which is that PLG principles trump tactics. For example, we talked about freemium and trials, and they're both 2 tactics under this third principle that we included on this slide. And they both help visitors understand your product and get value from it before needing to pay for it. But there's a lot of other ways you can achieve the same goal. And that's exactly why we believe more in focusing on principles and less in focusing on these tactics, as also tactics can be very trend dependent, depending on what's happening across the industry. So the 4 principles that we highly advocate is building the product with end user in mind and making sure it's as intuitive and frictionless as possible. Being transparent in terms of providing as much information up front, especially pricing details. Providing value first before charging for it, which we just talked about. And finally, offering your visitors and your users the ability to sign up, upgrade, downgrade, make any changes to their account without forcing them to get in touch with your team, unless obviously they want to. So we'll dive into a lot of these examples of how we put those principles into practice. But before we do that, we also want to touch on three important foundation pillars that enable our entire PLG strategy. The first one relates to democratizing access to data. So at Hotjar, everybody has access to all of our data, and we encourage and enable the team to use that to make better informed decisions. For example, over the years, I created more than 500 data dashboards and reports myself, and we actually have other colleagues that created a lot more than I have. And all these thousands of reports that our team built is what we actually use on a day-to-day basis to inform all of our product-led growth-related decisions. The second pillar is around investing in a very strong experimentation culture. While we're definitely not at the scale of some larger companies like Booking.com or Airbnb or so on in terms of the volume of experiments that we run, we still run more than 100 experiments each year, and many of which imply testing different PLG tactics. What you can see in these screenshots are basically 2 experiment trackers that we use over the years, with a lot of examples of A/B tests that we ran and the outcome of those, which everybody in the broader team has access to and can learn from. And we're huge fans of experimentation because it enables our visitors and users to shape our product, and is often the most reliable way for our own team to test different hypotheses and to gain confidence in different initiatives that we want to roll out. And finally, the third pillar that we have for our PLG strategy is defining clear North Star metrics. We've done that for all of the main steps in the user journey. You can see some of those here in this graph on the left, like the setup, aha, and habit moments. And we use those actively to define company OKRs, to define team level OKRs, but they also act as the guiding light for what we're focusing on to improve in terms of the user journey across different teams. So for example, our aha moment is when a new sign-up views an insight from Hotjar for the very first time, as that's when they're first getting value from our product. And that's something that always acts as a guiding light for us, and that's something we're always optimizing to ensure that as many signups get to that moment, that aha moment as possible. We already mentioned we experimented with a lot of PLG initiatives over the years. So we'll share now some of the examples of the ones that work the best for us at Hotjar. The first one is that we've always had a freemium offering, and we've always introduced a freemium offering of any new product that we created. So you can use any of our products for free. And the result of that is that it's really easy for visitors to sign up and get product value with no risk, which leads to tens of thousands of new signups each month and a very strong word of mouth. The next one is related to trials. As we mentioned before, we offer that on all of our paid plans. And these are completely risk-free and don't require any credit card to be able to get started with one. And the result of this is that those visiting the pricing page are 3 times as likely to sign up, partly because there's no commitment to try any of the paid plans. So no credit card included or no contract to sign before you're able to do that. So all of this is self-serve. The next one is reducing the time to value for our users. And that's something that we're always optimizing for. Actually, we have a dedicated team in the tribe that I'm leading that only works on improving the sign-up and onboarding experience, as both of those are extremely important parts of the user journey in product-led growth. And one of the highest performing ways we do that at Hotjar is by creating these custom integrations that you can see here on the left, which simplify how you can install Hotjar on your own site or product. And the result of this is that those that use the setup integration are more than 2 times as likely to complete installing our product and start getting value from it. Next, we have some examples of how we are illustrating product value. And we experimented with a lot of ways to do that over the years. And one that we found to be the most effective for us is creating an interactive demo that enables visitors to play around with our product before they even need to register for it. So they can access that from the website. And the result is that those engaging with the product demo are 3 times as likely to sign up for Hotjar, which is also why we added entry points to it from a lot of different parts of the user journey and different parts of the website. Next, we have self-serve end-to-end user journeys. And in terms of this aspect, something we focus a lot on is making sure that visitors can sign up and can tailor their accounts without needing to talk to our team unless they want to. And the result of this is that 80% of our revenue comes from customers that converted all by themselves. Finally, the last section from my side is growth loops. And that's a huge topic by itself. And we're only brushing the surface of today. Maybe we'll launch another webinar at some point only on growth loops. The most effective ones that we have is displaying our branding on the free version of our product. You can see a couple of examples here on the left. So for example, when a user that is on our free product sends out a survey, at the end of that survey, we include a CTA that prompts whoever completed that survey to try out our product. And the outcome is like we get tens of thousands of new monthly visitors coming from our branding on our surveys and our feedback each month. And we also get a lot of brand exposure. Obviously, that's much harder to quantify, but that contributes significantly to our direct traffic channel. And the second example of a growth loop, before passing it out to Andy, is our referral program. And that's where we give $100 or euros to anyone that refers a paying customer. This enables us to leverage our biggest product advocates and leads to a better return on investment than a lot of our other channels. So it seems like a large amount, but it's actually very ROI positive for the subscriptions that we do get from this channel. And I'll pass it on to Andy for product-led content.
Awesome. Thank you, Andre. So yeah, so we also apply a similar principle about demonstrating product value as early as possible into our marketing and into our content. And the way that we would do that is by aligning references to the product as they make sense within content. So I've got like 3 categories of content that we create on the slide. One is what we call buyer enablement, which is just like things that make it mega easy for people that are ready to buy Hotjar to do so. So an example would be a page that ranks really well for WordPress Hotjar integration, right? So the product reference there is super easy and the destination is always sign up. We also create content around the products themselves, like heat maps, user feedback, or Hotjar versus a competitor, and then category. And in all cases where we can, we're just showing our product demonstrating value, like within that content piece. We do the same on advertising. Right. Andre, I think we're back to you for the next one.
Perfect. Thank you, Andy. So we believe that a successful product-led growth strategy should imply a very strong collaboration between product and marketing, which is exactly the 2 teams that Andy and I are presenting today. So we'll walk you through how we actually do that at Hotjar. And first, I'd like to address a very common misconception, which is that product-led growth does not equal PM-led growth. And I actually think it's very unfortunate that product-led growth as a term includes the word product in it, as that led to a lot of product management teams owning and driving the PLG strategy and decisions by themselves in isolation from these other departments. And as a product manager myself, I actually strongly believe that's wrong. That's because PLG is a team sport and requires sales, marketing, success, and even other teams to actively contribute to shaping the product and ensuring that the user has a positive and cohesive user journey end to end throughout their entire experience in engaging with that product. And I'll pass it on to Andy to walk you through how we actually put that into practice.
Yeah, thanks. There's such a good point, because so I think sometimes there's like almost like the film Field of Dreams idea around PLG, as in like if you build it, they will come, which is like maybe true, but also may not be true. Like you also need to promote it, and then you may need to like monetize it in a different way. So I'll just share my screen just to get back to where we were and talk through that slide. Right, can you see? Right, wait a second. I had too many tabs open. It's a perennial problem. Got it. Okay. So this is something that we've implemented at Hotjar recently, which is, this is like a standard map that you might have of your OKRs, right? So we have company OKRs, and then we like filter down into marketing team and product team OKRs. And even though we might be moving towards the same destination, like if we map them out this way, it's entirely possible that by the time they get down to the individual team KRs, we're actually trying to do the same thing, but in like quite different ways. And although we might want to be moving together in this direction, we're actually starting to go like this. So something that we started doing from last quarter, and then we've continued it, is that essentially the relevant marketing team and product team, we have exactly the same number. And it's been like a super weapon in kind of forcing collaboration on similar goals. And the result was super positive too. So this is like 106% of target in the last quarter. So we're just like replicating this, now also having shared KRs with sales team and things like that, because like, well, everyone works towards the metrics that their boss asks them about in the one-to-one, right? So if we make that metric be the same for all stakeholders, then we all try and make that number go up. But the next thing I wanted to talk to you about here is like PLG can have like a really quite significant impact on your channel choice and acquisition strategy. And a model that we've used before to work out exactly what that might be is something called model channel fit. Now this is a Reforge model. Like if you don't know, Reforge is like a training provider, primarily really popular with product teams, massive with PLG. Model and channel fit, like it matters because the model is how much you get paid, essentially, how people pay you. And the channel is how people discover your product. The channels are rarely free. In fact, they're never free, right? So a good fit is when the model and the channel are aligned. Or another way of looking at that would be that you don't spend more money to acquire someone that you're going to get back. So, and like this chart then just shows you how like different companies, just examples of how different companies sit within this like ARPU, like revenue per user, and CAC, the amount of money you spend to get a customer spectrum. You've got like super like low revenue CAC products or apps down one side, and then like mega big enterprise products down the other side. But the reality for most PLG companies is actually this, because you might have a free plan or a low cost plan, and then you may have something in the middle, and then you may have a higher tier plan. You actually have different models running within the same company. So you need to think through like how much can we afford to spend to acquire X in different ways for different segments within your company, because you have a range of pricing tiers potentially, right? So you end up with something that looks like this, almost looks like the first chart, but rather than it be like WhatsApp down one end and a massive enterprise software company down the other end, your company exists all places along that spectrum. So you have your free tier or maybe very low tier, which very low or maybe zero, right, revenue per user, and therefore you need extremely low CAC, right? And that forces you to think about organic or viral growth channels. And then you have at the other opposite end of the spectrum, you have the high ones, right? How high that is, well, like that depends on your company, right? Where all of those things are completely opposite, right? High revenue per customer, much higher acceptable CAC, which means you can layer in more expensive acquisition plays. And then in the middle, the tricky middle, potentially, where you're in the middle of both like revenue and CAC, this may mean that you're priced out of the expensive acquisition plays. You need to rely on the lower cost ones, which means in that mid tier, you need to maintain fast and easy time to value so that those low cost channels can still be effective. But how do you work it out, right? How do you work out how much you can spend for a different segment? Okay, so the way that I like to do this is to kind of almost like play with the CAC payback calculation. So CAC payback is like an efficiency metric. It essentially means how many months does it take us to recover however much we spent to acquire a customer. And you can use like a version of that then to say, okay, if we want a CAC payback of 8 months or 12 months, if you've got in the table, for each of our segments, based on our revenue, how much can we afford to spend? So like this table here is like a completely fictitious company, but you can see that by the time you get to the 2000 ARPA segment, the amount of money you can spend to acquire a customer is significantly higher than in segment one. That's super useful for you to know if you're like in the marketing team and you're responsible for acquisition, or you're working closely with the product team on growth loops or whatever other acquisition initiatives, because it basically tells you exactly how much you can spend and what kind of tactics and channels you're like safe to use for those different segments. Now, this chart is designed to show like what low CAC and high CAC, what kind of channels like are suitable, or what might you be able to use. And I guess what I'm trying to challenge here is the notion that there's such a thing as a free channel. I really don't think there's a free channel. Like SEO is not a free channel. I know that because I have a team of people that write stuff, right? And we pay them, right? So it can't be free. So, but what you're looking at really is like a difference between channels that are like low in budget, but maybe high in people resource and have a high upfront time investment, and channels which are higher in budget, maybe lower in people resource, and have a consistent budget investment. right? And what this means is like the CAC dynamics of those channels over time, where you've got your first set, we have a high upfront cost. They basically trend down near zero over a long period of time. These are the ones that you want in your free segment. Okay, it will cost quite a lot at start, but over time, like the customer acquisition cost becomes lower and lower and lower and lower to the point where it's near zero, and that's fine then because you're getting near zero back. High CAC, it's going to be, you're always going to have to like pay to get like a sales team or like a paid marketing channel. The like, customer acquisition cost is going to be fairly consistent, but the return will be so much greater that it doesn't really matter as long as the return is higher than the amount that you spent. But let's like dive into sort of the low CAC and high CAC segments in a little bit more detail, like think through how you can think about them. Right, so here are just some examples in images of like things you can do for your low CAC segment, like some of which we've already discussed because they're Hotjar examples. Right, so you've got things like growth loops count here, user-generated content, community can count here, like referrals, integrations, like a partner ecosystem, like high intent SEO, like organic content distribution. These are all ways of reaching a really broad audience at scale where your upfront investment might be large, but once you have that upfront investment, the required investment that goes down over time. Right, which one of these you use for your business? Well, that really depends on your business, right? So like the nature of the company, the nature of the product that you have will kind of dictate some of the tactics. So for example, we've got Notion on the screen, Miro's the same. Both of those are really great for user-generated content. These Notion templates, the Miroverse, right? Hotjar, well, like we're not so great for user-generated content because people don't create like templates within Hotjar in the same way. We do, however, have a feedback widget and a survey which is put out onto thousands of websites every single day, which we essentially use as advertising space. So Hotjar built for having a growth loop, which is like using a product for advertising space. Notion, Miro, user-generated content. Only you know the answer to like which is the right one for your company, but you need to like think it through like that and come up with the one or two, right? Maybe one or two, maybe three that work. And the reason for you need to like reduce it, I think, for this is you can't spread yourself too thinly. One, because you're spending time rather than budget in these ones, so you need to think that through, and you can only run so many in that instance. And also, you're aiming for a low number of touch points across a really wide audience rather than like deep penetration on a much smaller audience. The high CAC segment, very much the opposite in every way. So in the audience, massive specificity around targeting. Like you really need to know who is in this high CAC segment. It can't just be people that give us more money. It's like, what is the nature of the people that give you more money? The message will also probably need to be different. So Andre earlier was talking a lot about kind of like users seeing value in a product and building up from the bottom. Well, in a high CAC segment, you need to think about it in a top-down way as well, because that will still be true. But high CAC means high revenue, which means someone is signing off a reasonably large invoice, and they will want to see organizational value as well as individual user value, which you may need to communicate in a different way. And then when it comes to executing, like this is just the opposite of the low CAC segment. Okay, so you can diversify channels there. You're almost certainly going to be using paid because you need really tight targeting. You can diversify channels because what you actually need is a high number of touch points within a much smaller audience rather than a low number of touch points in like a really broad audience. This is also where like product-led sales, which we're going to get onto it, can like really increase the ACV, and like layering on that sales touch and just can like help facilitate a like higher value sale. So talking product-led sales, right? So if PLG was a buzzword, this is like the buzzword within the buzzword, within like marketing and product, LinkedIn or podcasts at the moment. But like, what does it mean? Like, how is it different? Like, what's the difference between product-led sales and just sales? So the kind of the traditional marketing sales funnel is like fairly linear, just like handoffs. Right, so you have a marketing team might generate some leads, hand off to sales, close a business, hand off to customer success. Like PLG changes this in a way. If one of the principles of PLG is that people find value in the product, like the experience is important, what it means is we create like loads more overlaps. So the marketing team like continues to play an important role, like far go further down the funnel, like sales, customer success, like overlap. And actually, whereas like product was right at the end of the previous funnel. I don't even think it was on the diagram. It was so far down the funnel that actually now, like from the point of sign up, you're in the product and you're using it at the same time as having conversations or being into communications from the marketing team and having conversations with sales and customer success. This has kind of brought with it like a new metric, like a new conversion metric, right? The PQL, or so product qualified lead, or you might hear PQA, which is product qualified account. What this essentially means is, whereas like an MQL might be principally like worked out on like the demographics and firmographics and maybe some interactions with marketing activity. With a PQL, like you take out the marketing activity and you add product engagement. And these become much stronger signals of kind of like high levels of engagement and propensity to go up into a higher tier plan than you might find in MQL. Typical signals here might be like visiting pricing page, adding lots of users to an account, things like this, which just show people are like finding massive value. Then sales can come in and we can have a conversation about going up to a higher tier plan. One of the challenges, right, it's like lived experience now, is that actually like when the sales team come into a PLG org, well, this happens the other way around as well. When you try and layer in PLG activity into a sales-led org, you have a completely different language. So like the PLG, the self-serve, like the growth teams, we're talking in terms of like signups, installs, like first value, activation, and like then subscription. The marketing sales teams talking in MQLs, PQLs, meetings books. There's this thing called pipeline with all the different stages, like close one. What we found quite useful like early on when we were trying to work this stuff through is, first of all, when you map it all out, you realize everyone's just working towards a similar end goal, which is MRR or ARR, and that we've all got an eye on efficiency. So LTV, CAC, or CAC payback, however you want to calculate it. Actually mapping out the journey makes it easier to see how all of these things align. So I've got the metrics version of that on the screen at the moment, right? But it's also nice to do a version which is kind of like the user journey version, or like the discovering value version, and you can actually do it the whole way through of like what are the goals of each stage, both from our sense, which is what you're seeing, but also what's from the goals from the gates from the customer's perspective. This just creates like a shared language between all teams, right? Which is like almost like a companion point to the one about having shared OKRs. Because now we all know what each other means when we say these things, and we all understand how they eventually lead to like the like main revenue metrics that we care about. All right, Andre, back to you. I'll keep the share just to keep it clean.
Perfect. Sounds great. Thanks, Sandy. So we're actually almost at the end, and we want to leave you with some practical ideas that you can implement right away. So let's jump into it before we get to the Q&A section. So all of the tips that we have for you today are essentially first steps that you can take to act on these 4 PLG principles that we shared with you earlier. You can move to the next slide. Perfect. So the first one is important because the attention span of consumers today is smaller than it ever was before. So even if your registration flow is very short and quick and you already optimized for that user journey as much as you could, many of your visitors might not be willing to invest even 5 minutes to sign up to explore your product. And that's why we'd encourage you to try different ways to illustrate that your product's value to your audience across your website. And that can be as simple as having somebody from your team, yourself included, record a Loom or a video screenshot of themselves using your product and doing a voiceover walkthrough in terms of like what are all the benefits, different features and capabilities that your product offers. And obviously, if that's successful, there's a lot more sophisticated and engaging options that require a higher level of effort to implement, like interactive demos, like we mentioned before, that we're doing at Hotjar, that you can try next. Feel free to move to the next one. Perfect. And the next one we'd encourage you to do is to run either your first A/B test if you haven't run any A/B tests before, or your next one if you already have an experimentation program in place. And the example we gave before in terms of finding a new way to test how to illustrate your product value is actually a perfect candidate for your upcoming A/B test. And for example, the way you can do that in practice, in case you're new to experimentation, is that you would only display that and only introduce that product video walkthrough to half of your traffic. And then you can assess the impact that that has on the conversion rate of that cohort and on key business metrics that result from those that were exposed to this new video walkthrough. And if you're new to experimentation in general, I led a session on how to get started with experimentation for both our product and marketing teams a few years back. And I linked to a recording of it. You can see it here. You'll get access to it after the webinar. And I've also created a couple of experimentation tracker templates that you can make a copy of and use them with your own team to essentially create an experimentation portfolio, prioritize between different experiments based on the potential impact that each of them has, and then keep track of those results and share them out with the team. So both of these templates are easy ways to get started with your experimentation platform and program in case you don't already have one in place. And finally, the last one from my side before passing it back on to Andy is I would encourage you to identify what the most meaningful aha moment for your users is. And ideally, that's normally a metric that should mirror whenever your users receive enough value from your product that they want to come back for more. And typically, that's whenever your users first interacted with your core product features or if they took very specific user actions. And what qualifies a PQL can actually often overlap with this aha moment, as Andy mentioned before. So there can be a strong correlation between PQLs and the aha moment or the habit moment. So you can also use these signals to essentially qualify more PQLs that you can send to your sales team in case you have one in place. And anyways, the whole goal with this defining the aha moment and optimizing for it is to make sure that once you have that in place, you optimize your user journey so that as many of the new signups and your users that have recently started to use your product get to experience this aha moment, because that's essentially what can lead them to coming back for a product and then ultimately forming a habit around using it. Andy, I'll pass it back on to you.
Awesome. So a couple more. So one we've kind of touched on a little bit, which is creating shared goals across teams. I'm not going to go through the table in detail. You'll all get the recording and the slides afterwards, so you can have a look at it. But the point of the table is that whatever their overall goal is, in most instances, there's something that marketing can do towards it, there's something that product can do towards it, and there's something that sales can do. And therefore, it's completely valid for all teams to have that same OKR. The kind of the golden rule, the thing that is mandatory, is that the goal must be in everyone's official goals. As in, if you run OKRs, everyone has to have an OKR. It can't be one team has it in their OKRs and the other two have a handshake, because then you don't get the magic effect of everyone kind of being fully committed to making that number move over the quarter. And then the final one is this thing about acceptable CAC and understanding where your growth is coming from. So it's mega important. So thing one is do the acceptable CAC analysis that I spoke about earlier. I know that I just slapped a couple of mathematical formulas on the screen, which may have been helpful for some, maybe not for others. There's a link in this slide which takes you to a Google sheet which you can copy that has all those formulas, basically the table that you can see in the top right, and then you can just add in whatever information is relevant to your business, and it will spit out those numbers for you. The second one is 2 and 3 are both about understanding exactly where growth is coming from today. This may give you clues about which channels you should be leaning into, right? So if you're thinking about which channels to kind of go through, do some really hard analysis, some deep, honest analysis. So one in the attribution software to find out where your tracked growth comes from, and then run an attribution survey, like the one I've got in the example. Just ask, where did you first hear about us? Do it in the product ideally. You can do it on your website if you can't. Do it when people sign up, whatever. Because it will tell you some things that software can't tell you. This is a bit of a trend in marketing on LinkedIn, but it's true, right? There are just some things that the software can't track. For all you know, there might be an advocate out there on their YouTube channel, talking great things about your product every week, and you have no idea. And them or people like them could be an amazing partner for you. right? This kind of survey will tell you where you might be missing some of those opportunities. And then number 4 is, well, once you've got the acceptable CAC and you understand where growth is coming from, like you can start spotting opportunities. This might mean you need to switch some channels off if you're spending way over the odds for low cost customers, but that should mean that you can allocate that budget towards higher value customers elsewhere. Alrighty. So that's the end of the presentation. So we can start answering any questions that we've got. So I'm going to stop sharing so we get everyone's faces back on the screen.
Yes, I'm actually going to take control back from you, Andy, and I will put a questions slide up on the screen, I believe. All right. Okay, so we got quite a few questions and I will do my best, or we will do our best to go through all of them. First one, we had quite a few questions about what happens after trial in terms of how do you then convert your freemium customers to paid customers. So would love to hear from both of you, your insights on
that. Sorry, quick question. Can we see the questions that come through to make sure we don't miss that?
If you need, I can send them to you, Andre. But they should be on the Q&A portion of Zoom.
Okay, cool. Let me see.
Andy, do you want to take a first answer?
Yeah.
Well, Andre's
so as in, like, we're talking about
questions.
what happens after trial, right?
Yeah. So when the trial ends, what are any of your strategic recommendations for how to turn them into paid customers after trial is over?
Yeah. So I think here is where you need to understand what your point of value is. Your point of delight is mega important. And also doing some analysis here about how long it typically takes people to find that point of value. So if the answer to how long it takes is 14 days and you've got a 7-day trial, then people are going to struggle until you can double the speed at which someone can find value. They're just not going to discover it during the point of your trial, and that will obviously hurt conversion. So I think understanding some of the dynamics about your product, there's no one answer to how long is a trial. You could A/B test it, right? So 7, 14, 30 days, these are all things that are valid. Also, what happens at the end of trial? So you can go freemium and make trial available. You can use something called a reverse trial, where you let someone go to trial and they go back into freemium. And maybe that's on the assumption that you could have a long tail of conversion after that trial point, where someone can get value out of free and eventually come back through later. But I think the most fundamental dynamic you have to understand is what is that point of value? And typically, how long do people take? And make sure that your trial length is long enough to contain it. And then, of course, you can work to speed it up. But don't put yourself in a tricky spot right from the start by setting it up incorrectly.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. And if you have a trial that's too short, for example, that can also lead to people not even signing up to begin with, because they can anticipate that it's not enough time for them to be able to test your product, make sure to get enough value out of it, maybe get some approvals in terms of budgeting or compliance or anything else that they need to. And there's also the installation aspect of it, right? So if your product implies an installation step like Hotjar does, then that can also delay, or that can eat a part of the trial. So essentially what we do with our trials is we only start the trial after you install the product, because until that point, you cannot get enough value from it. So we only start the trial after you installed Hotjar, and then and then the trial runs for 15 days. And an interesting data point from our company is 30% of our paying customers have been using our product for more than a month before they became paying customers. So that means in between the 15 days that the trial is and a month or more, there's actually a lot of people that will continue to need to use the product before they can commit to paying for a paid version of it. And that's also why we're actually employing what Andy mentioned, which is a reverse trial. So when the trial ends, we automatically downgrade to our freemium, so then you can continue using the product even if you decide not to pay for it just yet.
Nice. Okay. So assuming that you've perfected your trial length and your balance between maybe freemium and free trial, because that's also an interesting dynamic, we have a question about user onboarding and which paths or strategies would you recommend to really help basically with user onboarding after you've had the trial ending?
I can maybe get started on this one. So in terms of user onboarding, I think that's actually such an important part, especially during the trial. And what we've seen, for example, at Hotjar and also at some past companies I worked at, is that the faster you have a new user that started to adopt core parts of your product, the higher the likelihood that they will engage and retain longer term. So the more you can accelerate how much value they can derive from your product in the first day or in the first week or the first 2 weeks, like that, it really depends on each product, as Andy mentioned, the better. So like our activation North Star metric right now, for example, is how many active days a new user has had on average in their first week. So we actually don't even look at the 2-week trial length. We look at the first week specifically, because the more we can engage people in the first week after they have their first contact with our product, the likelihood that they will they will form a habit and then retain long term. Andy, anything from your side?
Yeah, it's just, I guess it's probably a different flavor of the same thing, which is kind of the more you can understand what your stickiest use cases are, the more effective then you can make your onboarding, which is kind of working out the people that use the product for the most or for the longest period of time. What are the things that they do? So like a Hotjar example would be using our feedback product to set up an NPS survey and sending the results into Slack. Someone that's super sticky because people want NPS all the time. It's going into Slack all the time. That's useful to people all the time. So if we can facilitate that early, then we've created a sticky use case really early. So there will be examples like that in everyone's product where they've got this kind of model running. It's a case of identifying them and then making it easy for people to set them up.
And maybe just to add on the same one, something else that we've seen to be very powerful at Hotjar is personalizing the onboarding journey based on specific user inputs. So depending on the goal that you have when you sign up for a product, depending on your role, depending on your experience with Hotjar, if you already used it in the past, we will personalize the onboarding journey both during the trial and beyond trial to make sure that we're recommending you to take the actions and the behaviors that we believe are most relevant for you to take that will give you as much value from our product as possible. So essentially that ties to what Andy was saying. So for example, setting up integrations, if we believe that's something that really aligns with what your goals are for using our product, then we'll really encourage you to take those steps as early as possible and facilitate the process of setting up that integration. So we have tens of different combinations of different actions that essentially create these different personalized user journeys in terms of onboarding, and they really depend on all signups and their intent when it comes to use Hotjar to begin with.
Oh, I think you might be muted.
Laura, we cannot hear you. I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry. All right. So
No
in
worries.
terms of demonstrating value to a large volume of users, how do you balance not giving away great features to competitors?
maybe I can take a first stab at this because it's actually one of the biggest challenges that we have right now in full transparency across our tribe. And obviously, there's always this tricky balance between what to give away for free, so then you have a very attractive free product that tailors to a broad audience and can like really fuel your growth engine, versus also maintaining enough paid features that you can monetize those signups or a percentage of those signups afterwards. Because otherwise, it still costs a lot to maintain a free product. We have more than 1 million websites that use Hotjar. So a lot of those are on our free product, and currently they don't pay us anything. And obviously, like that implies a cost in terms of our team, in terms of like server use, in terms of a lot of other costs. So like it is important to strike that balance. And normally, like the way we approach this is, one, we run a lot of experiments to understand which of these features act as a better top of funnel growth driver versus a monetization driver. And then we also do a lot of analysis to understand what's the correlation and hopefully even causation between some of these features and product adoption, engagement, retention, monetization. We already have a ton of data on from existing users from our existing plans. So whenever we're thinking of tweaking our packaging or our pricing model or so on, we always look at a lot of these data, a lot of this data. So I think like those are the two approaches that we generally use, but I haven't seen at any company like a framework that's universally applicable in terms of this should go into freemium versus this should be gated behind a paid plan. So essentially, I think it's important for each company to understand these levers and like the tension between those, and figure out what's the mental model that they can use internally within their team to decide and have like some form of a decision-making tree where when they launch a new feature or when they're trying to optimize more for top of funnel growth versus monetization, then they can use that mental model or internal framework to figure out what should go where. But it's not a straightforward answer for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's such a good question, because like one of the like the downsides of extreme transparency around pricing is that we make competitor analysis like mega easy for each other. I guess you can't really do that and not like tell your competitors what kind of features you have and which ones you gate. I guess maybe this is like a motivation to try and not get into too much of a feature war, and just like focus like value generation on something else instead.
And maybe just to add one final note on this, I think a useful mental model in general is to think of the freemium version of your product as the part of the product that appeals the most and serves the use case for a beginner in whatever the job to be done is that you're focusing on. So let's say in this case, for Hotjar, we're focusing on helping product teams better understand their own users. So for them, we need to be able to offer enough value in freemium that you can still use Hotjar without paying for it and still be better at your job of like better understanding your own users, right? And then paid plans like we have, for example, Plus, Business, Scale. Those are more meant as the equivalent of more advanced features that are meant for a more for an audience that has more advanced needs as well. So that's sort of like the rough mental model. But freemium in itself needs to offer enough standalone value that like if somebody can use it and still complete this job to be done that they have. There's a whole framework on jobs to be done. We can like share some resources if you want to read on it. But that's I think like a mental model that I find very useful.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more questions. This one is more for you, Andy. What are the success metrics for product-led content? Knowing that there are so many touch points required to convert top of funnel leads before they sign up, and therefore the likelihood of one single piece of content resulting in a conversion is pretty low. So what should the goals be for individual pieces of content?
Yeah, so I have to say it depends, sorry, but it does. So if you think to the three kind of categories of content that I had up on the screen, so we had like buyer enablement, things that are talking about integrations. If people aren't signing up off of that piece of content because it's so bottom of the funnel, and yeah, someone may have read countless pieces of content before getting to that point, but if that page itself is not leading to sign up, then it's not working properly. So that's like super clear when we're at that part of the bottom of the funnel. Like if we're talking about like our products, like our guide to heat maps, it converts really well because it's so well aligned to what we do. Right, but again, it's super near the bottom of the funnel. So this is almost like your guide. Like the closer the topic of the piece of content is to someone converting. If it's like one of the last questions that they may ask a search engine before purchasing, then the metric is sign up. Right, but then we have a whole host of other. Actually, this live event, right, is a good example of something which has been fairly product led on the way through. But it'd be wonderful if you all signed up to Hotjar after this, after we stopped. But my expectation that will actually happen is fairly low, right? Because that's not the purpose of the event, right? So we've kind of got this other bit of content, which may be about, I don't know, like just being helpful, but like building perceptions, like perception changing, maybe, right? Which has like a different set of metrics. And here actually we're looking at engagement metrics. So for this live event, we looked at how many people registered. And then once we get off, the first question that I'll be asking the team is how many people actually showed up. Right. And so we look at that kind of thing and like how long people stayed on the webinar. If you take that into your website content, like your blog, then we want to make sure it's ranking. We want to make sure that people are reading it. So it really just depends, but really, like in my mind now, there are just like these two categories of content: things people read or interact with just before they buy, and everything else. And the first one, it has to be like sign up, or if you're in a sales-led org, like demo conversion. And then the other ones, then we're looking more at like interaction and engagement, or even kind of like how far we can distribute it. Would be the way that we're looking at it.
So just looking at the time, I think I'm going to wrap us up here. I really apologize to all the questions that we didn't get to answering, but we do have them all on record and we will do our best to follow up and answer them individually after this. As we've also said, the recording and the slides will be shared after this, so don't worry, you will get all of this good stuff to your inboxes after the webinar. So I want to say a huge thank you to Andy and Andre. I hope that you, the audience, got just as much out of this as I did. I'm still a very baby PM, so I really appreciate getting to learn from these two superstars every single day. And I want to put in a plug for our next virtual event. If you enjoyed this one, please come to our next one or recommend this to your UX friends, because we're going to be talking about the current state of UX research, how to make an impact now, and this will be taking place in September. And then one last reminder for our Hot Sauce conference, which is taking place again in November in New York City. Here is your last chance to scan the QR code and enter to win one of the 5 pairs of tickets. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and hope to see you either at our next event or in New York City.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. That's fun.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your day.
Thank you.